The canyon wind howled like a dying man's cry. Nahuel Yazzie crouched low behind a twisted juniper tree, the silver revolver in his hand, slick with sweat. 30 feet ahead, a mountain lion stared him down, eyes pale and steady, tail flicking like a warning. The scent of blood hung in the air. Rabbit, freshly killed, and now stolen from Nahuel's trap. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, not really. Just roots, bitter herbs, a strip of dried deer hide that barely passed for food. He gripped the revolver tighter. 1 bullet left, 1 shot, just like the rest of his life. Then the cat turned, sauntered back into the trees without a sound. Nahuel exhaled. He didn't feel relief, not anymore, just another breath he hadn't earned. That night, he stood by the fireless pit outside his cabin, staring at the stars in the cold black sky. Somewhere, someone would sleep with a full belly, a warm body, laughter nearby. He had silence, frost, and the company of old regrets. The next morning, he packed 2 pesos into a worn leather pouch, his last silver, and began the journey down the Chusca Mountains to Santa Fe. The road to town cut through dry rock and distant thunder. Dust devils spun like spirits across the arid land. Nahuel didn't stop once. 3 days on horseback, with only water, jerky, and the thought that maybe he wouldn't return alone. Santa Fe shimmered under the hard sun like a mirage built from broken promises and Mexican tile. The streets buzzed with energy, wagons creaking, children shouting, boots pounding the cobblestones. But beneath the noise, Nahuel sensed it, the same hunger he carried. Everyone was looking for something, a deal, a future, a fix. He dismounted near the edge of the plaza, where a crude wooden platform had been built. Strings of colored fabric fluttered above like streamers at a wedding, though the truth felt far colder. A handwritten sign was nailed to the post. Bride auction, 3 p.m., town sanctioned. No refunds, no questions. Nahuel tied his horse, pulled his hat low, and walked into the crowd of sweating men. They came in all kinds, miners, ranchers, traders. Some laughed, others looked desperate. He felt neither, just empty. He hadn't come here to bargain. He'd come here to gamble with 2 silver coins and the last of his soul. Don Valerio, the mayor, stepped onto the platform in a black coat and wide hat, wiping his brow dramatically. He was round, loud, and always 5 words away from insulting someone. "Gentlemen," he boomed, "today is historic. Some of you will leave with a woman worth more than gold. Others will leave with, well, a lesson in patience." Laughter rippled through the square. Nahuel didn't move. He counted the pesos again in his palm. 2 silver coins and 1 last chance. That's all I've got. He muttered under his breath. One by one, the women were paraded onto the stage. Some widowed, others orphaned by war or ruin. Prices soared. 10 pesos. 15. 20. Too rich for Nahuel. He watched with sharp eyes, not judging, not shaming, just seeing. One girl, no more than 19, bit her lip while strangers shouted numbers for her like cattle. Another kept her eyes closed the whole time. Some cried, others stood like stone. His money stayed in his pocket. The sun was falling lower now, casting long shadows across the plaza. The crowd began to shift, attention fading. That's when Don Valerio cleared his throat and said a little awkwardly, "We have one final offer." A hush fell. She has chosen to remain veiled until purchased. By her request. A murmur. Disbelief. Men stood on their toes, and then she stepped out. The woman wore a rough brown shawl, thick and coarse, covering her head, her face, most of her body. Only her hands showed, small, slender, pale as river stones. No name, no voice, just stillness and silence. "She's hiding something," someone whispered. "Probably a witch," another spat. "Or scarred," a third muttered. Don Valerio cleared his throat. "She is of age, healthy, comes from a good family facing hardship." He hesitated. "Let's start the bidding at 5 pesos. No one spoke. 5 seconds. 10. Laughter began at the back. "5 pesos for a ghost?" someone shouted. "She ain't even got a face." Men began to walk away. Some stayed, shaking their heads. No one wanted her, not even for 4, not even for 3. Nahuel stared at her, still as a stone. She never bowed her head, never moved. She never flinched when the world looked away, only when someone saw her. He understood that feeling, deep in his bones. Suddenly, his voice cut through the noise. 2 pesos. Gasps. Eyes turned. Don Valerio looked stunned. "Sir," he said carefully, "did you say 2? Nahuel stepped forward, slow and steady. His boots echoed on the boards. He held out the coins. "It's all I have," he said. "But I'll pay it." The silence cracked into mockery. 2 damn pesos! Guess he wants a ghost wife. The Apache must have gone mad." Don Valerio waited, but no one else offered. At last, he dropped the gavel. "Sold. For 2 pesos. Nahuel reached out his hand. The woman stepped down, silent, still veiled. He led her to the horse. She climbed behind him without a word, arms gently around his waist. As they rode into the falling dusk, the laughter behind them faded into wind. That night, in the mountains, Nahuel lights the fire. She still hasn't spoken, still hasn't removed the veil. But he doesn't press. He just sits beside her and says quietly, "You can keep your silence. I just ask for one thing, truth, when you're ready." And behind the veil, she breathes in and doesn't flinch. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke and old earth. Nahuel pushed the door open, the hinges groaning under years of mountain wind and silence. He stepped aside to let her enter first, but she hesitated, her head still bowed beneath the rough brown shawl. The fire hadn't been lit in days. The air inside felt colder than the wind outside. He cleared his throat softly. "It's not much, but it's dry, and it's safe." She stepped inside without a word, her figure stiff, cautious. The dirt floor had been swept clean, the wooden table tucked under the small window, and a single cot rested in the corner beside the hearth. There were no luxuries, no distractions, just what a man needed to stay alive. Nahuel set the small bag of dried meat on the table and lit the fire. It caught slowly, the flames licking orange against the stone. She stood just far enough away for her face to remain in shadow. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. "You hungry?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She gave a single nod. He handed her a strip of jerky and stepped back, allowing space. She took it slowly, with hands that didn't tremble, but not because she wasn't afraid. Her fear ran deeper than her skin. It was the kind that had settled in her bones. They sat in silence. The only sounds were the soft snap of the fire and the distant wind brushing against the wood slats of the cabin. Nahuel chewed slowly, his eyes never lingering too long on her, though he felt her presence like heat. He finally spoke. "You don't have to tell me anything. Not tonight." She didn't reply, but her shoulders lowered slightly, as if the weight pressing down on her had shifted a little. Night fell hard in the mountains. Stars poured across the sky outside, and the cold curled around the cabin like a second skin. Nahuel laid out a spare blanket beside the hearth. "You can take the cot," he said. "I'll stay near the fire." She didn't argue. She didn't thank him. She simply moved toward the bed, still cloaked. Just before she turned her back, he said gently, "You don't owe me anything, Ayana." Her body froze, just for a moment. "I know the way the world works," he continued. "But this ain't that." Then he stretched out by the fire, turned his back, and said nothing else. When morning came, Nahuel awoke to the smell of coffee. Not strong, but there. A small pot sat on the coals, and she was crouched beside it, still veiled, still silent, but moving through the cabin with quiet purpose. He sat up slowly. "That yours or mine?" he asked. A pause. "My mother used to make it," she said, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. Even when there wasn't anything else to cook. It was the first time she spoke. Her voice was low, unsure, but steady. Nahuel stood and moved toward the table. She poured him a cup and sat across from him, still covered. They drank in silence, and when the mugs were empty, he leaned forward slightly and said, "I don't need to see your face." "Not until you want me to." For the first time, her hands unclenched. She set the mug down slowly and whispered, "You'll change your mind." He shook his head. "No, I won't." Minutes passed. She reached for the edges of the shawl. The fire popped. The room held its breath. She didn't lift it fully, just enough to reveal her chin, then her mouth, then her nose, then, slowly, she pulled it over her head entirely. Her hair fell in thick black waves down her back. Her skin was the color of soft clay, warm and smooth, and her eyes, when they met his, were the shade of riverstone after rain, wide, intelligent, cautious. But it was her expression that stopped him. Not fear, not pride, but something rawer, a kind of dignity that refused to die, no matter how the world tried. He didn't flinch, didn't smile. He simply nodded. "Thank you," he said. She studied him. "You're not surprised." "I've seen beauty look like pain before," he said. Silence settled again, this time gentler. She sat straighter, though her hand still curled tightly in her lap. "My name is Ayana Montoya," she said quietly. "My father sold me to pay his gambling debt. They made me wear the shawl because they said my face would lower the price." Nahuel's jaw flexed, but he didn't interrupt. "They said no one would want a Pueblo girl with mixed blood, especially not one who used to have everything." His voice was low. "Used to? My family. We were once respected. Spanish blood, landowners. Then the war took the men. The drought took the land. My father lost the rest in cards." She looked toward the fire. "I was his last bet." Nahuel took a deep breath. "You ever kill a mountain lion?" Her brows lifted in confusion. "I nearly had to," he said. "Few nights ago, I had one bullet left. That cat walked away. I didn't starve, but not because I fought harder, just because it wasn't my time." He leaned in. "I don't believe God gives us many second chances, Ayana, but I think you might be one of mine." She blinked, and something in her face cracked, not pain, but the weight of being seen. She never flinched when the world looked away, only when someone saw her. That thought echoed in Nahuel's chest as she turned away, silently wiping the corner of her eye. That evening, they sat beside the fire again, eating a meal that was simple but warm. She spoke more, just fragments of her life, her mother, her fear of never belonging. Nahuel listened, not to respond, just to be present. Before they slept, she asked him, "Why did you really offer those 2 pesos? He looked at the fire for a long moment, then answered, "Because no one else did." And I knew I couldn't ride away from that stage and sleep right again. She nodded once. The blanket around her shoulders shifted, and for the first time she looked comfortable in the room. Outside, the wind was shifting. Far below the mountain, in the tiled halls of an old estate near Tucson, a man in black gloves poured wine and read a telegram aloud. She was sold, disguised, Apache buyer, heading into Chuska. The man's face went cold. Then bring her back, he ordered, and bring whoever dared to take her. The air smelled of rain, though the skies were clear. Spring storms had rolled through the night before, and now the mountain valley shimmered with clean light. Dew clung to the grass outside the cabin, and somewhere in the trees a hawk cried once before the world fell quiet again. Nahuel stood barefoot just outside the doorway, sharpening the blade of his small wood axe. Inside, he could hear the gentle rattle of dishes and the soft, steady footsteps of Ayana. It had been 3 weeks since the auction, 3 weeks of silence and stories, of cautious laughter, of firelight and shared meals, of walls that slowly softened between two people who had no reason to trust and every reason to try. Nahuel had said little about himself. Ayana had never asked. Still, there were truths you could read in a man's silence. The way he looked out into the trees too long, the way he folded his clothes, the way his hands always stayed open when near her, never closing, never assuming. That morning, she had hung a row of herbs by the kitchen beam, humming under her breath. Her veil had not returned since the night she removed it. He stepped inside and leaned the axe against the wall. She turned to him with a small, quiet smile that surprised even her. "I'm starting a garden," she said, wiping her hands on her skirt. "By the side fence. The soil's soft after the storm." "Need help?" "I need space," she replied. "But I'll take your muscles when I need to move rocks." He smiled. That was when the knock came. A single fist, twice, firm, measured. A rhythm that sounded like no stranger. Nahuel's shoulders tensed. He stepped toward the door and opened it. A tall man stood outside, wearing a faded union coat and a crooked grin. Long braids touched his collarbone, and his rifle was slung casually over one shoulder. "Still bad at saying hello, Yazzie?" Nahuel stared for a beat, before a rare grin cracked across his face. "Caleb." They embraced quickly, shoulder to shoulder, like men who had once survived something together. Caleb stepped inside, removing his hat as he took in the sight of Ayana standing by the table, cautious, curious. "You must be the girl who put color back in this ghost," he said kindly. "I'm the one he paid 2 pesos for," she replied flatly. Caleb blinked, then laughed. "Smart investment. You even made him clean the place." She cracked a smile, then returned to her task. But she was listening closely. Caleb turned to Nahuel. "I heard rumors about a woman in a sack, an Apache bidder, and some trouble stirring in Tucson." Nahuel's jaw tightened. "What kind of trouble?" Caleb lowered his voice. "Don Ricardo Montoya is back, cleaned up, rich again, and loud about the daughter he lost." Ayana's hands froze on the tablecloth. Nahuel stepped beside her. "I didn't take her," he said. "Doesn't matter," Caleb replied. "They don't care about facts. They care about control." Ayana finally spoke. "He gave me away, sold me like livestock." "I believe you," Caleb said gently. "But he's still her father, and now he's got lawyers, men with rifles, and friends in Santa Fe." Nahuel crossed his arms. "Let them come." "No," Ayana said firmly. "I won't be dragged back like a child." "You won't," Nahuel said. "Not unless you want to." Caleb sighed and pulled a flask from his coat. "Then I guess I'll stay a while. Help out. These hills don't feel as safe as they used to." Ayana nodded, though her gaze had shifted. She was no longer in the cabin. She was hearing ghosts in distant rooms, fancy dresses, whispered shame, her mother's silence. the pressure of being the disappointment. That night, the three of them ate quietly. Ayana prepared stewed beans and wild onions, and Caleb told stories of his wandering days. New Mexico skirmishes, lost horses, a night spent stuck in a tree with a wounded mountain lion below. She laughed once, genuinely. Later, as Caleb slept by the hearth and Nahuel split more firewood outside, Ayana stepped onto the porch, arms folded against the chill. She looked up at Nahuel. "I think I forgot how to breathe when Caleb said my father was back." "You're still breathing." "Barely." She leaned against the porch beam. "Do you think a person can lose their name?" "What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands. "Everything I was before. It's gone. The house. The family name. My place in the world. You're still here. But who am I?" Nahuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No one buys kindness, but they remember it forever." She looked up at him. "That's who you are," he said softly. "You didn't disappear, Ayana. You stayed kind. That means you're still yourself." She blinked hard, and he looked away, respectful. Behind them, inside the cabin, Caleb stirred in his sleep and mumbled something in Navajo about smoke on the wind. Nahuel turned slightly, eyes narrowing. He sniffed the air, then he froze. Not fire, but horses. Not near, but close enough to be watching. He motioned Ayana inside and stepped off the porch, rifle in hand. No moon, no movement. But he could feel them. They weren't alone anymore. The next morning, Nahuel rode down to the edge of the valley, alone. Caleb followed on foot behind him, blending with the rocks. They found boot prints near the river. Fresh, heavy, military issue. When they returned to the cabin, Ayana had packed a small satchel. "I'm not running," she said before either of them spoke. "No one asked you to," Nahuel replied. She looked at both men. "But I am not going to sit here and wait for him to decide who I am again." "What do you want to do?" Caleb asked. "I want to look him in the eye," she said, voice steady. "And I want to say what I should have said years ago." Caleb glanced at Nahuel. "Then we ride at first light." Far away, in a stone courtyard filled with rose vines and polished brass lanterns, Don Ricardo Montoya stood over a wooden table, sipping dark coffee. A man in black gloves approached and whispered, "They've been seen north of Shiprock. She travels with 2 Apache men." Don Ricardo smiled without warmth. "Then they ride straight toward me." The sun had not yet risen when they left the valley. The air was cold and damp, mist curling along the riverbanks like memory refusing to die. Ayana sat tall on the saddle behind Nahuel, her arms around his waist, but her grip was looser than before, less afraid, more resolved. Caleb rode beside them, silent as ever, scanning the brush and ridge lines with the eyes of a man who had learned to survive by never trusting peace. They didn't talk much that morning. Words had already been used. Now came the part that demanded silence. By noon, they crossed into the edge of Santa Fe. The city smelled of dust and arrogance, of polished boots and old families pretending they still mattered. The plaza bustled with merchants and soldiers, ranchers and judges, but it all sounded far away, distant, like a world that had long since shut its doors to people like her. Ayana pulled the brim of her hat lower as they passed a group of women whispering behind lace fans. Her dress was plain, cotton, earth-toned, but her presence stood out like fire among silk. She walked with Nahuel and Caleb through the gates of the courthouse without hesitation. At the top of the stairs stood a man in a black coat and pressed trousers, silver cufflinks gleaming in the sun. He was thinner than she remembered, but no less sharp. His hair slicked back, his posture regal. Don Ricardo Montoya, her father. His eyes swept over her like she was some piece of property left out in the rain. "So," he said coolly, "you've decided to stop hiding." "I was never hiding," she replied. You just stopped looking. He smirked, his voice oily with rehearsed charm. Let's not play the rebel, Ayana. You're here now. That's what matters. She folded her arms. I'm here to speak for myself, not to be spoken for. Don Ricardo's smile cracked. You'll embarrass yourself in front of these men, he said, gesturing to the small circle of lawyers and town officials behind him. I've arranged a respectable match for you. Marshal Grant is waiting. He's offered your name a second chance. That name doesn't belong to me anymore. He stiffened. You disgrace your blood. She took a step forward, her voice rising only slightly, but sharp as a knife. You mean your blood? The one that sold me in a cloth sack because my skin didn't shine white enough for your guests? A ripple went through the bystanders. Even the lawyers shifted uneasily. Don Ricardo didn't blink. You were emotional. You still are. No, she said. I'm finally clear. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You think this... He motioned toward Nahuel and Caleb. This wilderness life is better than the one I offer? Nahuel's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Ayana stared at her father. You can't rescue someone who isn't drowning. His face twitched for the first time. I came here because I won't be hunted like an animal. I came to tell you. I don't belong to you. Not your money, not your name, not your shame. One of the officials cleared his throat. Miss Montoya, this is a matter of legal family. I am not Miss Montoya, she snapped. I am Ayana. That's enough. Don Ricardo's voice turned ice. Then you choose exile, poverty, obscurity. She smiled, slow and steady. No, I choose myself. He turned to Nahuel finally. You must feel proud, stealing a daughter from her family. Nahuel stepped forward, calm but unmovable. She's not a possession, and she walked away long before I ever saw her. And you think you can give her a better life? I can give her something you never did, Nahuel said. Respect. Don Ricardo scoffed. You'll both regret this. He waved his hand, and his men stepped aside. A small victory, but it felt seismic. As they turned to leave, one of the older lawyers approached Ayana quietly. Your father's influence doesn't stretch like it used to, but be careful. Pride makes powerful men reckless. She nodded. So does fear. Outside, the sun had begun to lower, the sky warming into a golden hush. Caleb said nothing until they were beyond the edge of town. Then he muttered, I've seen angry men, but he's not just angry. He's planning something. I know, Nahuel replied, and he's not done. That night, back in a rented room above an old blacksmith's shop, Ayana couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, wrapped in a woven blanket, watching the oil lamps flicker in the street below. Nahuel sat on the edge of the bed behind her. You did something brave today, he said. I just said what I should have said a long time ago. He tilted his head. It still counts. She looked over her shoulder. When I stood in front of him, I thought I'd feel small. But I didn't. You shouldn't. I burned every bridge I had. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you just started walking your own road. She studied him. Do you ever think about where your name comes from? All the time, he said. I carry two legacies. One wants me to forget the other. She nodded slowly. Now I know how that feels. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're not what he tried to make you forget. Her voice cracked slightly. Then what am I? He looked at her with steady eyes. You're a woman who walked into the lion's mouth and left standing. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she believed him. 2 towns away, in a moonlit hacienda, Don Ricardo stood in front of a table covered in sealed letters. One of them bore the crest of Marshal Grant. He picked it up and stared at the wax. His advisor approached. Sir, We received confirmation. They're headed back toward the mountains tomorrow. Good, Ricardo murmured. Let them think they're safe. He lit the corner of the letter with a match and watched the wax melt into ash. They reached the edge of the valley just before sundown. Nahuel rode ahead, scanning the old ridgeline where crows circled like omens above the treetops. Ayana rode behind him, her fingers tight around the reins, face wind-chapped, eyes locked forward. Caleb trailed slightly off to the left, his rifle strapped across his back, boots coated in trail dust and silence. No one spoke. Not since they left Santa Fe. Not since Ayana had looked her father in the eyes and walked away from everything her blood once promised her. As the cabin came into view through the pines, Nahuel slowed his horse. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Moema had arrived as planned. Ayana's friend from childhood was seated by the fire pit outside, grinding herbs with practiced hands. She stood when she saw them, wiping her palms on her skirt. "You made it back," she said softly. Ayana dismounted and embraced her. Moema held her a moment longer than expected. "You smell like answers," she said with a grin. Ayana let out a short laugh. "Then you know it wasn't easy." Moema looked toward Nahuel, then back to her. "He's been asking about you, Ricardo." "I know," Ayana said. "He won't stop." That night they sat around the fire and ate lentil stew in thick clay bowls. The mountains around them felt quieter, heavier, as if holding their breath. Ayana didn't eat much. Her stomach was too knotted. "He won't take this loss lightly," Caleb said, eyes reflecting the flames. "Men like him don't like being embarrassed." "I didn't embarrass him," Ayana replied. "I exposed him." Nahuel watched her carefully, noting the way her jaw clenched, how her shoulders never fully relaxed. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. "I do," she whispered, "because he made sure no one else would." Moema reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver mirror. She handed it to Ayana. "You're not who you were. Look." Ayana stared into her own reflection, pale and flickering in the firelight. The girl she used to be, soft, uncertain, obedient, was gone. What stared back was someone older, someone sharpened. "I used to think shame was something you could wash off," she said, eyes still on her reflection. "But it doesn't come off with water." Moema leaned in, her voice gentle but firm. "Then maybe you burn it off." The words struck deep. Later, when the others had gone to sleep, Ayana remained awake, sitting by the hearth with a worn, leather-bound book on her lap, her mother's old prayer journal, one of the only things she had taken from her family home before it was sold off piece by piece. She opened it slowly, flipping through dried flowers, pages stained with old ink and grief. At the center, she found the passage she remembered by heart, written in her mother's perfect script. "Honor is not given by blood. It is earned by how we live when no one is watching." She closed the book. Then she stood and stepped outside into the night. Ayana walked barefoot to the small plot of dry grass where Nahuel had placed the firewood for morning. She took a torch from the hook near the door, lit it, and pressed the flame to the edge of the journal. The fire caught fast, swallowing the leather and pages in seconds. Nahuel came out at the scent, eyes widening as he saw her standing barefoot in her nightdress, arms crossed, watching the book burn. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. She didn't turn. "I'm letting go." The flames danced higher, hissing as if the book itself resisted. "Everything in there told me how to live to make him proud, what to wear, how to speak, who to marry, who not to love." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "All of it was written like commandments, but not one word taught me how to survive when the love was gone." She turned to Nahuel then, and he saw it in her eyes, not sadness, not rage, release. This time, I won't let shame wear my face. Nahuel stepped closer. You're not what he said you were. I know, she said. Now. When the fire had reduced the journal to ash, she stepped back into the cabin and lay down beside the hearth, where she slept for the first time in weeks without waking. The next morning, Caleb and Nahuel found boot prints in the mud by the creek. Not theirs, not Moema's. 4 horses, 2 heavy, 2 light, recent. They followed the tracks west toward the narrow pass near the canyon. At the edge of the ravine, they found a note nailed into a post, freshly inked, sealed with wax. Nahuel tore it off and read aloud, "To the man who stole what is mine, return her, or I will come for her, with fire and with law. R.M." Caleb spat. He's bluffing. He wouldn't come into Apache land. Not alone. He won't come alone, Nahuel said. He'll come with enough men to make the law look like an excuse. Back at the cabin, Ayana read the note in silence. Then she folded it, placed it into the coals, and watched it burn too. That night, under the moon, Nahuel took out a small box from his saddlebag. Inside was a pair of silver rings, simple, forged by his own hands. He offered one to Ayana without flourish, just held it in his calloused palm. I don't want to put it on your hand until you choose it. She stared at it, her throat tight. You already gave 2 pesos for me, she said softly. He shook his head. I didn't buy you. I saw you. That's all. Her fingers brushed the ring, but she didn't take it yet. Instead, she whispered, Then let me earn it. Far down in the canyon basin, Don Ricardo stood over a map, surrounded by hired guns in dusters and wide-brimmed hats. A red X marked the cabin in the Chusca Mountains. His voice was calm, almost amused. They think this is over, he said. But dawn always tells a different story. The wind carried smoke down from the north ridge. Not thick, not yet, but sharp enough for Caleb to spot it first, crouched on the slope just after dawn. He whistled once, low and flat. Nahuel lifted his head from the cabin steps. The dogs barked behind the shed. Ayana was already by the fence, gathering herbs into a woven basket when the signal reached her. She didn't freeze. She didn't flinch. She straightened. They're here, Caleb muttered as he came down the hill. Scouts? Nahuel asked. Too many for that. 4, maybe 5 on the ridge. The others are waiting behind the tree line. Ayana came forward, her braid swinging against her back. How long do we have? Caleb looked at the smoke again. By sunset, if they're riding slow. Sooner if they're stupid. Nahuel didn't waste time. Then we start now. The hours that followed were fast but purposeful. Caleb sharpened the rifle sights and checked the powder. Nahuel moved along the perimeter, reinforcing the fence with thick branches and stone. He tied a bell string between 2 trees near the rear slope. Nothing fancy, just enough to sound if boots got too close. Ayana pulled the shutters closed and packed rations into sacks, flour, jerky, dried beans, salt. But when she reached for the water skins, she hesitated. Not because she planned to run, because part of her still wanted to, and part of her was done running forever. She went into the bedroom and opened the small cedar trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside was the shawl she had once worn over her face, the one that had hidden her from the world. She touched it once, then folded it and placed it beneath the firewood pile without a word. Outside, Moema arrived on horseback, wrapped in her ceremonial shawl. She carried bundles of sage and blue cornmeal and a small clay bowl filled with ash from her family's hearth. You're not alone, she said to Ayana as they embraced. I know, Ayana replied. But I think I need to feel alone before I can stop fearing it. Moema placed a hand on her cheek. Then come with me. They stood in the small clearing behind the cabin, where the earth sloped toward the valley. Moema drew a circle in the dirt with her fingertip, then poured the ash, the cornmeal, and crushed rose petals into it. "You were born between two bloods," Moema said, "taught to shrink, taught to smile when it burned. But the fire that made you, it's still inside." Ayana knelt beside her. "What if I'm still not enough of either?" Moema smiled sadly. "Then you're already more than both." They lit the sage. Ayana closed her eyes, breathing the scent, letting it rise through her bones like memory. She whispered something so soft it nearly vanished into the wind. "My name was never yours to give away." When she stood again, her spine was straighter. Inside, Nahuel placed the silver ring on the table where the sunlight caught it just right. He didn't ask again. He didn't need to. That afternoon, he sat with Caleb, mapping the possible approach routes on the kitchen table using bits of coal and dried beans. Caleb tapped the north slope. "They'll come from here. Ricardo's too proud to ride straight in. He'll want to watch us first, make us sweat." Nahuel didn't lift his eyes. "Then we won't give him the chance." Caleb leaned back. "This is a bad plan." "There is no plan," Nahuel said. "Just the truth." By late evening, the clouds had thickened, casting a copper-colored light over the ridge. Ayana stood outside the cabin door, wearing a simple cotton dress and the knife Nahuel had given her strapped to her thigh. Not to be used, just to be remembered. Nahuel stepped beside her. "You ready?" She didn't look at him, just stared out at the trees. "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready," she said. He nodded. "Then maybe just be brave." She turned to him. "You ever wonder what kind of woman I might have been if none of this happened?" "No," he said without pause, "because that woman would have never found her way to me." Her lips parted, but whatever words she had were lost as the first distant echo of hooves reached them. Thunder without rain. They were coming. The hired riders came into view first, 8 of them, all armed, some masked, some not. They fanned out just beyond the perimeter, halting in a crescent around the cabin. Then the final figure appeared, black horse, polished boots, and a coat that looked more like ceremony than warfare. Don Ricardo Montoya. He dismounted with calculated grace, removed his gloves, and took 2 slow steps toward the gate. "Daughter," he called out, as if this were a family visit. "We have things to discuss." Nahuel stepped forward. "You can speak from there." Ricardo ignored him. "I've come with patience," he said. "I've come with forgiveness." "You've come with guns," Ayana said from the doorway. His eyes met hers. "You've forgotten your place." "No," she replied. "I finally remembered it." He smiled, slow and venomous. "You don't understand what you're walking away from." "I do," she said. "I'm walking away from a name carved in stone and silence." Ricardo's expression darkened. "You still carry my blood." "I carry what you gave me," she said, stepping forward. "But I don't carry what you tried to take." One of the men behind Ricardo shifted, hand near his pistol. Caleb raised his rifle an inch in response. Nahuel held steady. "This land isn't yours," he said, "and neither is she." Ricardo's voice was quiet now, deadly. "Then you'll both starve in it." Ayana stepped fully beyond the fence. "If you come further, you'll find out what I'm really made of." And for the first time, Don Ricardo faltered. Because he saw it, not just in her words, but in her stance. She wasn't afraid of being disowned. She had already disowned him. That night, the campfires of Ricardo's men burned low in the valley. They hadn't attacked. Not yet. Inside the cabin, the mood was quiet but tight. Everyone slept lightly. Ayana sat near the fire, hands wrapped around a cup of warm water, staring into the orange glow. The silver ring still rested on the table beside her. Nahuel joined her, saying nothing. She didn't look at him. She just picked up the ring and slipped it onto her finger. No ceremony. No promises. Just choice. At first light, the silence broke. It wasn't the roar of gunfire or the scream of riders, but a slow, deliberate sound. Hoofbeats approaching from the ridge, steady and certain, like someone announcing the beginning of something final. Nahuel stood at the cabin door, rifle in hand. Caleb was already on the roof, eyes narrowed beneath his hat brim. Moema stayed by the horses, calm and still, one hand resting on her bow. Ayana stepped outside just as the riders appeared. Don Ricardo rode at the front this time, no more hiding behind threats or formality. He wore a dark coat embroidered with gold thread, his gloves tucked into the belt of his saber. Behind him rode 6 men, rifles on their backs, cold silence in their eyes. They halted just beyond the fence. Don Ricardo dismounted without a word, walking forward until he stood alone in the open space between them. He glanced around the homestead, at the crude fencing, the stone chimney, the drying herbs strung across the porch. Then his eyes landed on Ayana. "You've made your point," he said. She didn't move. "Then why are you still here?" He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Because I believe in giving people a chance to come to their senses," Caleb muttered from the roof. "Funny how a man with guns thinks that's mercy." Ricardo raised his voice, sharp and performative. "You have until sundown. After that, I will come through that gate, and when I do, I will not be asking." Nahuel stepped forward. "If you step through that gate, you'll leave in a different shape." Ricardo looked past him to Ayana. "This is your last chance." She didn't blink. "No, this is yours." His jaw tightened. "The day you sold me was the last day I was your daughter." The wind picked up just then, catching the edge of her dress, sending dust curling between them like a line drawn in sacred earth. Without another word, Ricardo turned, mounted his horse, and rode back toward the ridge. His men followed. But he didn't look back. The rest of the day passed like a held breath. Nahuel dug trenches by the fence line. Caleb laid traps along the trail. Moema whispered chants under her breath and placed symbols carved into corn husks above the door. Ayana worked beside Nahuel, sleeves rolled up, hands raw. She didn't ask what came next. She already knew. That afternoon, while they rested in the shade, Nahuel turned to her. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." He studied her. "For revenge?" "No," she said. "For truth." She pulled a folded scrap of cloth from her pocket, the edge of the shawl she had once worn on the auction block. "I want them to see me." Nahuel looked at the fabric, then back at her. "Then they will." As the sun began to dip behind the ridge, the shadows grew long and sharp. The wind shifted, colder now, laced with the scent of blood waiting to be spilled. They heard the horses first, then saw the glint of rifles. Don Ricardo's men moved in a wide crescent around the cabin, but they didn't attack. Not yet. From the center of their formation, Ricardo raised a white cloth, a parley. Nahuel stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. Caleb remained hidden. Ricardo approached alone, halting 10 paces from the gate. "I brought only words this time," he said. "And a name." Ayana walked out from the cabin. Her hair was unbound. She wore a woven sash across her chest, the colors of both her bloodlines, brown and crimson, dust and fire. "Speak it," she said. Ricardo took a breath. "Your name is Esperanza Montoya, and you were born to rise." She shook her head slowly. "My name is Ayana, and I wasn't born to rise. I was born to survive." He tried to soften his voice. This world doesn't care for survival. It respects power. That's why it's broken, she replied. He held out a piece of paper, official, stamped, sealed. A marriage license. Marshal Grant is willing to... Ayanna took 2 steps forward, drew a small blade from her belt, and sliced the paper in half without breaking eye contact. Then she let the pieces fall. The wind took them before they hit the dirt. Don Ricardo's face twisted. You think this ends with theatrics? You think these people can protect you? They don't need to, she said. I already did that for myself. He reached for his pistol. And that's when everything changed. From the tree line, a sharp whistle cut the air. Caleb, a warning. Ricardo's men began to move. Nahuel stepped between Ayanna and her father, raising his rifle. Moema stood at the cabin window with her bow drawn, arrow notched. Then Ricardo saw something in Ayanna's face, something he hadn't accounted for. She wasn't afraid. She was done. Don't, she said quietly, hand hovering over her own blade. Because if you try to make me yours again, I'll show you exactly what you raised. For a long, aching second, no one breathed. Then, slowly, Ricardo's hand dropped from his weapon. He looked around and saw what he'd truly lost. Not a daughter, but control. Without another word, he turned, mounted, and rode off. This time, for good. That night, the 4 of them sat in silence beneath the stars. No toasts, no laughter, just breath and stillness. Ayanna wore the ring again. Not because it was asked, but because she had chosen it, freely, wholly, with no weight left on her back. Nahuel handed her a cup of warm cider. She took it, eyes distant. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "Not with the same weapons," Nahuel said. Caleb added, "Men like him don't die in one day, but they do break." Ayanna looked toward the fire and whispered, "Then let his name turn to dust in the wind." The frost came early that year. By the end of September, the high ridges had already begun to grey with snowcaps, and the wind carried the kind of chill that meant winter was no longer waiting. It had moved in, slow and steady, like a guest that no one had invited, but everyone knew would stay. Ayanna woke to the sound of sparrows in the eaves and the scent of cedar smoke curling through the cabin. The fire had burned low through the night, and Nahuel was already outside, chopping kindling with clean, even swings. Caleb had left a few days earlier, riding north with a caravan in need of protection. He said he'd be back before the first snowfall. Moema had returned to her village in the valley below, taking with her a bag of herbs and a letter Ayanna asked her to deliver, unsigned, unsealed, but final. The cabin was quiet now, but not empty. She stretched and slipped out of bed, the wooden floors cold under her feet. The light outside was soft, dusted in gold. Morning light, the kind that didn't demand anything yet. She wrapped herself in a shawl, hers, not borrowed, not imposed, and stepped out onto the porch. Nahuel looked up as she approached. "Sleep?" he asked. "Some." He handed her a mug of warm pine tea, and she leaned against the post, watching the smoke rise into the pale blue sky. For a while neither spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything important had already been spoken. After a long silence, Ayanna said, "Do you know what I remember most about that first day?" Nahuel turned to her. "You didn't look at me like I was broken," she continued. "You didn't look at me like I was something to pity." "You weren't," he said simply. She nodded. "But I didn't believe that yet." He studied her for a moment. "Do you believe it now?" She met his gaze. "I do." There was no triumph in her voice, no pride, just truth. That afternoon, they walked to the riverbank where the water ran low and clear. Ayanna carried with her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were the ashes of her mother's journal, the scraps of her old name, and the last ribbon she'd worn as a Montoya. When they reached the bend in the river, she crouched low, unwrapped the bundle, and let the contents scatter into the water. The wind caught them first, then the current. Nahuel stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her back. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She just watched until every piece disappeared into the distance. When it was done, she stood and said, "Let the river carry what I no longer need." As they turned to walk back, she added, "It's strange. I thought I'd feel lighter, but I don't." "You won't right away," Nahuel said. "Healing doesn't ask for permission. It just happens when you're not looking." That night, they sat at the kitchen table, mapping out the next planting season. Carrots, beans, squash. Ayana traced rows onto parchment, her handwriting strong and even. Nahuel talked about expanding the shed, maybe even building another room. Not for a child. Not yet. Just for space. For growing. As the fire crackled, Ayana reached into the cupboard and pulled out the pouch of seeds her mother had once given her before everything fell apart. She'd kept it all these years, unopened. Inside were 3 corn kernels, smooth and golden. She held one between her fingers and placed it on the table. Nahuel raised an eyebrow. "You planning to plant that?" She smiled. "Not yet. I just want to remember it's here." He nodded. Later, as they lay in bed, Ayana rested her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. "I used to think love was a kind of debt," she whispered, "something you owed or earned. And now? Now I think it's more like land." Nahuel turned his head slightly, curious. "Land?" "Yeah," she said. "Something wild, something you care for, not control, and if you tend it right, it gives back." Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, the world turning, slow and unstoppable. In the distance, the ridges stood tall and quiet, holding the sky. Ayana closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She wasn't a name anymore. She wasn't a price. She wasn't what was taken or what was lost. She was what remained. She was what she chose. And in the stillness of that mountain night, the truth settled like snow. Some stories don't end with revenge or rescue. Some end with reclamation, with a woman no longer asking for freedom because she's already living it.